Hello everyone, this is Global Fashion Workshop. I remind you that we post new videos every day. I also want to remind you that some of our video courses are already available. Buy them if you haven't done it yet. We would really appreciate your support. Today we'd like to show you one more useful technique. We're going to show you how to edge a V-neck with a bias binding. Have a look at the mock-up. We've already cut the V-neck and the bias binding is 2.5 centimeters wide. First, we need to fold the bias bindings in half and press them. Be very careful. The straps for making the bias bindings should be cut at the angle of 45 degrees, it's a must. Otherwise, they wouldn't fit the V-neck. Be very careful when ironing. Do not stretch the binding, it's very important. Today we'll show you how to edge the front neckline. The back neckline can be edged the same way. It's not hard to do it. First, we need to double the neckline with the interfacing material. Attach a small piece of it at the deepest point of the neckline. Watch the way Nataly is doing it. It should be hidden under the bias binding when the neckline is ready. Well done. The neckline is doubled, the binding is almost ready. Let's go to the sewing machine. Apply the bias binding on the right side of the neckline. Join the edges together and stitch them. The width of the seam is 5 mm. Be very careful. Make sure that the edges match. The neckline should be beautiful, both from the wrong side and from the right side. Be very attentive, please. Mark the center front in the binding. This is where the seam should end. It's a checkpoint. Be very careful. Make a small backstitch here. Have a close look here. The last stitch should be made right in this point. Stitch the binding to the other side the same way. Be very careful. Unfold the first binding and attach the second one. The seam should start right in the same point. The neckline should be symmetric. Do not forget to make back stitches in the beginning and the end of the seam. The width of the seam is 5 mm as well. Cut the threads. Have a look at the result. The two seams meet in one point. Make a small notch here. Let's cut the extra pieces. Next, we need to top stitch the binding. Direct the seam allowance to the bias binding. The width of the seam is 1 mm. If you do what we're doing now, it will be very easy for you to iron the binding. When you reach the checkpoint, make a backstitch. V-necks are always made in two stages. First you stitch one side and then the other side. Cut the extra pieces from the seams. Be very careful when cutting the extra pieces. Make sure not to cut too much. Make sure not to cut the binding itself. Next, we need to do the same thing with the other side. First, we need to fold the binding accurately. Watch way we're doing it. The one, which is already top stitched, should be underneath the second one. The detail should overlap on the wrong side. Nataly can start stitching the second seam from this point. Be very careful. Thus, Nataly fixed the end of the bias binding on the wrong side. The width of the seam is 1 mm. Cut the extra pieces from the seams. Be very attentive. As I said, it's very important not to cut the bias binding. Have a look at the wrong side. Cut the edge of the lower binding. And then cut the other extra pieces. Wrap the lower binding with the upper one. Watch the way Nataly is doing it. Cut all the extra pieces, especially when working with the strong fabrics. Please be very careful and attentive. We're making a mock-up of cotton. Fold the details this way and then press them. Be very attentive, please. Nataly is ironing the bias binding from the wrong side. You can shape the details with an iron. It's very convenient to iron the details when they are top stitched. Press the other side the same way. We'll stitch the binding one more time. The width of the seam will be 5 mm. You can either do it the way we are going to show you, or you can fix it with the invisible stitches. Be very accurate when ironing the angle. Have a look here. Fold the detail accurately. Pin it. And then press. We've cut all the extra pieces. This is why the seam is flat. We are ready to stitch the details one more time. The width of the seam on the right side is 5 mm. But you should stitch the binding 1 mm away from the fold. As I've said, you can edge both the front and the back necklines using this technique. Be very accurate when stitching the angle. Fix it with the seam. If you don't want to stitch the binding once again, you can sew it with the invisible stitches by hand. Be very careful. Do not make any back stitches here. Have a look at the result. This is the wrong side. You can see the two seams here. The corner is fixed. Let's have a look at the right side. You can see just one seam 5 mm away from the edge. Let's go to the ironing desk. Be very attentive when ironing the details from the right side. Do not stretch the neckline when ironing it. It should be neat and symmetric. We were glad to show you one more technique for edging the v-necks. We hope that you find our tutorials useful. That's all for today. We're Ira and Nataly. Subscribe to this channel, buy our courses, write the comments, share the videos, press the like and the bell buttons. We would really appreciate your support. Thank you. Goodbye.